Hello and welcome to Calm the Farm podcast, where pharmacy business meets legal wisdom, minus the headache. In each episode, we share practical legal tips and real-life examples to help you run your pharmacy with confidence. I'm your host, Sarah Stoddart. Thanks very much for joining us. Welcome back to another episode of Calm the Farm podcast. It's hard to believe that we've been going for over 3 months now. It's very exciting, and for the listeners who regularly tune in on a Monday or whatever day you get around to it, I am really keen for your feedback and also to know if there's any particular topics you would like covered on the podcast. So while you're thinking about that, we'll jump right into today's topic, which is a very general overview around how the federal and state requirements for pharmacy businesses differ. So let's start at the federal level because, of course, pharmacies are complex businesses. They are heavily regulated and they're regulated at both federal and state layers of government. What you need to think about firstly is the pharmacy approved or not? If it is an approved pharmacy, and what we mean by that is that it is approved to supply pharmaceutical benefits under Section 90 of the National Health Act. If it is an approved pharmacy, it has regulation at both federal and state level. If it is an unapproved pharmacy, which is also referred to as a private pharmacy, it is not regulated at a federal level and only regulated at a state level. So that's the first thing to determine. Are you approved or not approved? Now, for the purposes of unapproved pharmacies that are only regulated at a state level, what's important to know there is even though you may not have approval to supply PBS benefits, you are still operating as a pharmacy business and required to comply with the state laws around that. Therefore, whenever you are opening or changing a private or unapproved pharmacy business, you still must make the required applications and notifications to your state regulator. And of course, those applications and notifications differ from state to state. So it's important you're looking at the right regulator's website and forms and of course legislation. Now, for the approved pharmacies, so the ones that are dispensing PBS medications, where they have 2 layers of regulations, the same thing applies at a state level. That is, whenever there is a change to the pharmacy business or a new pharmacy business, etc., at state level, you need to make the required application and notification to the state regulator. And like I say, that varies from state to state. The complication for approved pharmacies is that they have the added regulatory compliance requirements that are brought upon it by the Department of Health and Aged Care at a federal level. So those requirements vary depending on what is happening. But for a new pharmacy, obviously there needs to be an application made to the Australian Community Pharmacy Authority, which is a separate body to the department itself. However, the application is made to the department, so you need to meet their requirements. When there is a change of ownership of a pharmacy business, you also need to make an application to the department, and that requires submitting a suite of documents, which I'll talk about shortly. You also need to make applications to the federal department where you are doing things like changing the directors of the company that owns the pharmacy business or changing the business name. That also needs to go through the department. So it's important to always know which layer you have to go to, and often for approved pharmacy businesses it will be both layers, that is federal and state. When you apply to the department for a application under the pharmacy location rules, which is then considered by the ACPA, there's obviously a heap of documents which have to be submitted, and they are referenced, of course, in the rules. In addition to what is referenced in the rules, you also need to provide documentation like ASIC extracts for any of the companies involved in the structure. However, when it comes to change of ownership applications, When you are acting for a buyer, or you are the buyer doing your own application through the portal, there is a whole suite of documents that need to be provided. This includes the ASIC extracts for the companies that are involved, details of the pharmacists that are acting as individuals or underlying the companies. This involves their registration numbers as well as their email addresses, and the email addresses must be separate for each person, so you can't have a generic email address. It's also a requirement to upload lease documents. Now, this can trip people up. So when uploading lease documents, you need to, of course, upload the lease that gives the legal right to occupy. You'll also need to update evidence of it moving from the seller to the buyer, essentially. Now, that might be a transfer of lease, it might be your deed of consent, it might be some other document. However, those documents need to be the complete documents and they need to be signed. If they are not signed or incomplete, the department may accept it. However, they won't process the application in final form and give it final sign-off if that documentation isn't complete. So sometimes you'll lodge an application to the department, they'll process it, but make the actual final approval conditional on further information or documentation being required. In addition, when you apply to the department at a federal level, you also need to provide them evidence of state approval. Now, you can go to the Department of Health before the state approval is given. However, as I mentioned, they won't give final sign-off until they have everything they need. So if it is that the state approval is outstanding, they will say that they need that information before they can give that final sign-off. So it's really important that you have your ducks in a row, your documents organised, so that you can give the department the documents they need at the time that they need it. If you are successful in getting a grant of an administration number, be it because you've been recommended for approval by the ACPA or your change of ownership application has gone through successfully, there are then other documents that need to be completed and returned to the department. These are more operational documents and relate to your bank account details, ABN, etc. Again, it is important that those are completed properly and signed correctly so that there's no delays in getting the pharmacy up and running when you commence trade or when settlement occurs. So that's a bit of an overview of the two roles that the different layers of regulation play in a pharmacy setting. Now, of course, they have other roles as well, and there's other reasons you might be liaising with the regulators, but these are the most regular and most common, and that's why they've been chosen for the topic today. Would appreciate hearing your thoughts. Any questions, you know where to find me. Thanks. Until next time, take care.